All right, let's get started. I know at least all my students want to be somewhere else, so I'm going to honor that. I'm Laurel Peterson. If there are any students here who have me online, I'm your professor, I'm just saying. Okay? So welcome, I'm so glad you made it tonight. I have two amazing writers here, thriller writers, so the conversation should be really fun. Elise Hart Hipness, way over on the other side there, is the best-selling author of Lights Out, the first in the Kate Green series. Before becoming an author, Elise was a national television sports reporter. The Kate Green series is based on her experience in the high-pressure, adrenaline-pumping world of live TV. Like her protagonist, she chased marquee athletes through the tunnels of Madison Square Garden and stood before glaring lights reporting to national audiences. The second book in the series, Dangerous Play, will be released in the fall of 2024. Well, that passed, right? So we got it. Okay. In addition to reporting for Fox Sports Network, Elise was a news reporter at New York's WNBC TV, News 12 Long Island, and the Associated Press. Elise is currently co-president of Sisters in Crime Connecticut, as well as a member of Mystery Writers of America and International Thriller Writers. A graduate of Brown University, Kipnis divides her time between Stamford, Connecticut, and Key West, Florida. Lucky girl.
Yeah.
That's right. Tessa Wegert, in the middle, am I saying that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
Is the author of the popular Shayna Merchant crime novels, which include Death in the Family, The Dead Season, Dead Wind, The Kind to Kill, Devils at the Door, and The Coldest Case. If you're not depressed now, you will be. A former journalist, Tessa grew up in Quebec and now lives with her husband and children in Connecticut. She is co-founder of Sisters in Crime Connecticut and co-director of ITW Pitchfest. Visit her online at tessawegert.com. All right, so thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for coming. We usually start with you each reading for about 15 minutes. I'll let you decide who wants to go first.
I think you should go first since you're in the end and you were introduced first. Does that work for you? I will do whatever you want.
Here's the mic.
Whatever makes you. We'll just move the mic second. Yeah. Okay.
Testing, okay. Why is Alexa Kane, someone I haven't seen in decades, lying dead in an ice bath of the training room of the U.S. women's national team? Why here? Why now? Why her? I moved my eyes from Alexa's limp body to Savvy. She's waiting for me, arms folded across her chest, steeled for what's to come. It's as much a surprise to me as to you, she preempts my accusation, digging her toe into the floor. Assuming you are surprised, Kate, she adds, lips pulled tight. I want to remind Savvy she has much more to hide than me, but I stop myself. We need to deal with the crime scene, meaning to get out of here. I glance at Alexa's body again. My heart sinks. I can't believe she's dead. Guys, Quinn interrupts. What are you talking about? Oh my God, did you know her? We both glance at Quinn. For an instant, I forgot about her. I imagine that Savvy did too. Don't be ridiculous, Savvy says, dismissing Quinn, her southern drawl back. Quinn seems too distracted to question her coach. I've never seen a dead body before, Quinn says, tone low. I don't feel so good. She bows her head, her body convulsing. She chokes and turns, heaving onto the floor. I gag at the smell, holding back the bile surfacing in my mouth. We need to call the police. While I'm not a cop, I come from a long line of law enforcement on my biological father's side. Although until very recently, Liam Murphy remained a practical stranger. Liam abandoned my brother, mother, and me for his job. I still remember the fight between my mom and Liam. I was 6, and we were in his hospital room. The doctors had just removed a bullet from his side. My mom gave him an ultimatum, his family or the force. Liam chose the force, and Mom moved my brother and me across the country. As if that weren't bad enough, Liam made almost no effort to see us on his designated weekends and holidays, blowing us off 9 times out of 10. But when I reconnected with Liam this past autumn, I sensed a change in him, and a nagging feeling his decision to stay on the force was more complicated than I imagined. Or maybe I'm just desperate to believe Liam's a good guy. That's what my brother would tell me if I shared the fact that I'd been in touch with dear old Dad. I dial Liam. "Hi, Kate," I hear smile in his raspy voice. "Great live shot. I loved how you held the coach's feet to the fire." I glance at Sav. "Thanks. I called because there's an emergency." I quickly explain the situation.
And the rest you'll have to buy the book to find out. It's a good cliffhanger ending, actually, isn't it?
It's really good.
I'm going to read two kind of from the middle of a chapter toward the beginning of the book. The book is The Coldest Case. The North Country was a chameleon, adopting a new skin each season, and over the last month, the brittle twig brown of fall had been replaced with winter white. Acres of pristine fields unfurled like down blankets, but the roads had gone grimy with use, ice melt bespangling everyone's cars with slush that would stick around until spring. I could hear it splatter as I drove, a wet, uninterrupted drone beneath the tires of my SUV. It was after 3 by the time I dropped off Bobby at Val's place and made it to the barracks. I wasn't there to punch a clock. Only Tim and Val were on duty today. But despite its dry heat and salt-stained floors, the state police station kept calling me back. "How was class?" Tim asked as I clicked the door shut behind me. The weather had been brutal, 2 straight weeks of bone-numbing cold, the likes of which the area hadn't seen in years. But indoors, I found myself overheating. Tim watched with amusement as I rested off my winter coat, shedding the season's confining second skin. Despite the familiar setting, or maybe because of it, seeing Tim lit up my chest like a flare. 2 months we've been married, our red and white midwinter wedding at the Sackett's Harbor Ballroom still a freshly cut bloom, and even in the most mundane of moments, it astounded me that he was mine. "Class," I said, "is as exhausting as everything else these days, but man, do I love it. Every kid should learn self-defense. That's my new mantra, the hill I'll die on." The fact that I hadn't thought to implement the program in the fall pained me. Maybe if my niece and her friends had known how to defend themselves, things would have played out differently. "Where's Val?" I asked, scanning the room for our colleague as I dropped into a desk chair. "Bobby's home safe and sound." "Break room, cup of decaf?" "I'm good. Courtney says hi, by the way," I told Tim. "We've got that dinner on Friday." His eyebrows quirked. "Will there be French onion dip?" It was his mom's new go-to recipe for guests, the caramelized onion spread served with salt and pepper ripple chips, and Tim was obsessed. I opened my mouth to tell him I was sure the dip could be arranged, but something stopped me short. A mechanical whir in the distance, tinny and muffler gruff, coming from the main road. It wasn't the snowmobile that alarmed me. They roamed the area in herds, crisscrossing icy farmland until the crisp bluish powder looked like scratched glass. What curbed my reply and brought us both to the front window was the shouting. The shouting was also what told me the figure now stumbling across the parking lot was a woman. Given the insulated snowmobile suit and helmet, it would have been impossible to gauge gender by sight, but her pitch and resonance spoke volumes. The state police barracks on Route 12 had a small lobby, and by the time Tim and I got up front, she was in it, pummeling the on-duty trooper with a chain of harried words. "We need help, out on Running Pine." The woman was nearly breathless. She flipped up her tinted shield to reveal teal eyes outlined in black eyeliner and glittering with apprehension. "Afternoon, ma'am. I'm Tim Wellington, and this is Shayna Merchant. We're investigators with the state police." Tim extended his hand and held the stranger's just long enough to convey a promise of the security she seemed desperate to find, though she must have noticed the lines of concern etched in his face. They'd deepened in the 3 years since I'd met him. I tried not to take that personally. "Did you say you came from Running Pine?" "Yes, I'm Jane Budd." "You a year-rounder out there?" Her helmet bobbed. "That's right." I said, "Tell us what's going on, Jane." She pulled in a juddering breath. "My neighbor, Kerry Caulfield, he's missing. We think he may have fallen through the ice." I'll end right there.
Wow, you guys didn't lose any of your time. You sure you don't want to do a little more?
Whatever
you
want.
Another book? Or...
Listen, we could talk for as long as you need us to talk.
Yeah,
There's no
we're
concern about
happy.
time, trust me.
Okay, all right. I just figured you might like to show it off a little bit, so that's all right.
Do you want this back?
Can you hear me in the back? Yeah.
Yeah, okay. We'll just pass it
I'm
back.
pretty loud.
Me too.
No comment.
So you're both writing series.
Mhm.
I started reading in the middle because I wanted to read your latest, although you've come out with new books since then, so I blew that. But how does a series author manage to give enough context to someone like me who comes in later without giving away previous plots?
You go first. Okay. Sure, I'll go first. That's a great question. For me, the books are, of course, part of a series, but they don't necessarily have to be read in order. I do feel like it's nice to read them in order because you don't get spoilers that way. You really follow along the protagonist's journey from the very start. But if you haven't read any of the books, this particular one is a great one to jump in with because the way it's written is part of it is a modern day mystery that Shana Merchant is investigating, this missing man on the island who was on an ice fishing trip and possibly broke through the ice or possibly was murdered. But there's also a second cold case, hence the title, The Coldest Case, that takes place in a different timeline through a series of flashbacks that are actually act kind of as a prequel to the series. So you actually find out a lot about the protagonist that you have not known. Even if you read all the books, you wouldn't have known that part of her backstory until now. So the way that I work her story from one book to the next and keep the story flowing, but still create some kind of access point for people who are coming to the series with whatever, book 3 or book 4 or book 5 or book 6, is twofold. One is I have a through line, a subplot that is a part of every single book in the series that involves a serial killer that she had been investigating back when she lived in New York City and worked for the NYPD before she moved way upstate New York to work for the state police. And his storyline is very much intertwined with hers because you find out with the very first book that they have a personal history. They both are from the same town. And it takes a long time for her to even realize who he is and what part of her life what he was to her back then when they lived in the same town. And so that's another mystery that unfolds over the course of the series. And then the other piece of it is I try to evolve the character in new, fresh ways from one story to the next. So with this one, shortly after I stopped reading, you find out that she's 7 months pregnant. So, she's finding herself in this situation now as a senior investigator with the state police. She would be the one to be called out to a potential homicide or a missing persons investigation or scene, but she's 7 months pregnant, and the missing person is on an island. And the river around the island is frozen over, but there are some patches that might be soft and it might be very dangerous to cross over, especially on a heavy snowmobile. So, in this book, her transition and her evolution as a character in the series is really about coming to terms with protecting herself and trying to justify that when her role as a senior investigator is really about protecting others. So with every book in the series, you get a little bit of that evolution, but you also get that through line that really holds the series together, that holds all the books together.
And do you have it planned out? The
No.
series? Okay.
That would be nice, but I never really know from one book to the next up until now I have not known from one book to the next how many more books there will be.
Right.
Sometimes my very first book I wrote as a standalone and then found an editor to acquire it who said, would you make it into a series? And I said yes, but at that point I only knew for sure there would be 2 books. Then I got a contract for a 3rd. Then I got a contract for a 4th and a 5th. Then I got a contract for a 6th and a new series. So I didn't know. So with every new book, there is that challenge of trying to figure out what makes sense in the character's life, what must happen to her now in order to keep that evolution of her character moving, but also what have I not done yet? And can I come up with a fresh mystery that is going to keep people engaged? And when you're working on a series in particular, the key is really to make every book better than the last, because as we know, we're in a library, there are lots of books out there for readers to choose from. We have to keep pulling people in and make them come back to us and our protagonists, and so try to make their stories as compelling as we can.
Great.
So there were 2 reasons why I wanted Tessa to go first. So first, because I wanted Tessa to go first, but second, it's the question that I asked Tessa, because we, we're friends and know each other and everything. And when I started my journey, I wasn't published, and she had encouraged me and everything. So when I found out I was writing a series, because my book was pitched as a standalone, although in my brain it was a series. And then my agent pitched it as a standalone. And then I got a series. I'm like, Tessa, how do I write a series?
You say yes.
You say yes and
Right.
no after us.
Yeah, I'm like, okay. And one of the interesting things you said to me, and what Dangerous Play is about, is your second book is when you delve into the character really deeply. And I had a place to go with Dangerous Play because it has flashbacks of my character to a time when she was a teenager and a conflict she had as a teen athlete playing on women's national youth camps, and the drama between her and her teammates, like very non-sportsy drama, that potentially comes back to her life now. But it was a fun book to write because you had given me that direction. I think that is a really good direction in general when you're writing a series. The first one's kind of, get revved up, get moving, kind of glance at all the characters. But the second one, you can do a deep dive. And you did a deep dive in your second one. With going back to Vermont and everything, yeah. And then I have through lines, like you said, Kate's relationship with her father becomes a mystery throughout, and Kate trying to find love. So I knew my through lines. Like, even though it was one line, I knew that Liam was an issue, her father. I knew that I would try to do something romance in a very small way. But I'll tell you, the third book, which I turned in Monday, the first round.
Woo! All right.
Yeah. That was really hard. And I tried to make it different. You helped me again with that because I was really having a hard time with the timeline and how to structure it. Because there's a kidnapping. And I've never written, I know murder much better than I know kidnapping. Sorry, yeah. And it's really hard to write as the action is going versus looking back. So I really did struggle, but it's also fun-ish to have new challenges. Each time you try a new book and try something a little bit different. But I think, number one, you have to have the through lines. Number two, you have to really have an author friend who helps you out with it.
Rating groups and rating classes are the best. Let's just say you always need someone to bounce ideas off of, a sounding board, somebody to just sit down and say, can I just tell you my idea or the scene? Can I just sketch it out? And you can tell me if it sounds crazy or boring or whatever else. And because as writers, so much of the process is so solitary.
Yeah.
We really need that connection.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've got a room full of students here and other writers, yes?
Yeah.
How, if they don't have a writing partner or writing group right now, how do they find one?
Well, let us tell you about Sisters in Crime.
There you go.
So Sisters in Crime is a national organization with chapters all over the country, and Elise and I started the Connecticut chapter a few years ago, and she is now president. We were co-presidents for a while, and she's taken over as president now. And it's very inexpensive to join. The annual dues are like $20 a year or something like that,
Yeah.
plus the national, which is not a lot either.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then what you get from that membership is access to lots of other writers in Connecticut, and it's primarily for mystery and thriller writers. But we have a lot of writers who, if their book just has some kind of element of a mystery, and if you really think about it, most novels have some element of a mystery or, some kind of suspense involved. So it's not like very strict when it comes to genre or subgenre.
I mean, if you pay, you can join.
Men too, right?
Yeah, Sisters in Crime
Yes,
is men
it's called
too.
Sisters in Crime, but it's open to everyone. You don't have to be a woman. But it was started initially to kind of create more like an opportunity for women crime writers to be on more equal footing with men, because there weren't a lot of opportunities, all those years ago, 50 years ago or something like that. Anyway, so there are in-person events. Yeah, there are in-person events. There are online events. There are writing sessions over Zoom that happen. Yeah, do you want to
There's
talk a
also,
bit more
sure,
about
Well, first of all, who is not in like a mystery thriller suspense genre here? Anyone not? You're not, okay. What
There are a
kind
lot of students, so
Yeah.
they're not gonna be,
They're
Yeah.
shy? They're,
well, there's that.
Finding their way.
oh.
Yes.
yeah.
There's a lot of different organizations for different types of writing. And the thing to do would just be to Google like what genre you're in, because these organizations exist all around. So you can find resources, but you're also welcome to join us. The chapter I found the most valuable before we started ours, when I was just a beginning writer, was something called the Guppy chapter, which is part of Sisters in Crime National. I know, it's such a great name, right?
Yeah.
And they would have mini classes where you would learn a very specific part of the craft. Like maybe you'd spend 4 weeks, and they're online. They were asynchronous. Yeah, whatever. So you could just like,
Asynchronous is
yeah.
great, yeah.
All right. You can learn very specific elements of the craft, and then also have a community that you build online, and you're sharing information and everything. And there's Mystery Writers of America if you are in the thriller mystery genre. It's really, you can also through national or even our local chapter find writing, like informally reach out and say, is anyone interested in like being in a writing group? Is anyone interested in beta reading? Like everyone kind of wants to help and stuff. So there's a lot of people out there. I'm sure there are Facebook groups if you're not in this genre that you could just find. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just add that it's very rare. Elise and I have met a lot of other authors, of course, like over the years doing this, and it's very rare to find an author who doesn't have, at the very least, 1 or 2 or 3 other writer friends that they really lean on for both accountability to make sure that they're on track with their word count and meeting their deadlines, or again, to bounce ideas off of. And there's no shame in that. You know, it's a solitary career in a way, but you need that. You need to be able to access, you know, other readers, because that's ultimately who we're doing this for, is other readers, and get inside someone else's head for a little while and get a sense of if they are happy with the direction that you're going in or can give you some advice. And so it's a big part of the process, leaning on other writers.
Great. So why thrillers rather than other types of mysteries?
Yeah, oh, we both have good answers. It took me, should I go first?
You
Since
can
I
go
have the
with,
mic,
I
guess.
don't care.
Okay, whatever. It took me a long time to figure out why thrillers and mysteries. It was partly because my mother was a librarian and I grew up kind of between the stacks, and she just put mysteries in my hands, and I read a lot of Agatha Christie and like children's mysteries from the UK and various things, and loved it. And then it took years until I was maybe 3 books into writing this series that I realized the other reason is that the small town that I grew up in Quebec, Canada, was home to a serial killer. And when I first moved there at 10 years old, who was never found, it has never been found. And when I first moved there at 10 years old, like left everything I knew, all my friends behind and all the way across the country, and went to school, almost on the first day, the very first thing I heard was, you know, there's a serial killer. And he's called the bootlace killer, and he chokes people with the laces from his boots. And like, for a 10-year-old, I was petrified, thinking, what have my parents done, brought me here, having brought me here, this is terrible. And I think that was always in the back of my head. And he never was found, and the crimes were never solved. And honestly, it was a whole tragic situation. But I think just being in that environment and then knowing, okay, like, crime is real, and violent crime is out there. And especially in a small community, you know, it becomes like woven into the fabric of the culture of that town. And that's what I did with the series is, you know, every crime really impacts the community in so many different ways. And so I try to dig into all of the different characters' mindsets and what it what it means to them, and they're all involved, even if they aren't actually, responsible for the crime or whatever. It impacts them in a really serious way, and I think because I saw that firsthand, that was the reason why I kind of went in that direction.
I have a kind of a similar answer. When I was a news reporter at WNBC and at News 12, I covered crime. I covered crime before I was a sports reporter. And I covered terrible things like the Long Island Railroad Massacre trial and Joel Rifkin's serial murder trial. I covered tragedies like the Flight 800 crash. I'm looking around at all these people. They're probably too young to remember any of these, but some of you will. But my day in and day out was murder, death. And as a reporter, you didn't feel, or I didn't feel like I felt wrong about feeling bad about it because it wasn't my tragedy. There were people whose families and loved ones were dying, and I was telling the story, but it wasn't personal to me. And I remember my mom saying, like, you really are depressed a lot now, and it makes sense because I know, like, I keep telling the story and I keep trying to be like, my mom didn't mean it in a bad way, like my mom was trying.
Concerned.
She was concerned,
Yes.
but she's like, it makes sense. Your day in and your day out is so tragic, like what you're seeing. And then again, like Tessa, I didn't realize why I wrote a thriller. I mean, it's obvious why I wrote about a sports reporter. I was a sports reporter, wanted to go back to the world without having to do my hair and wear makeup. But then I heard another author talking about it and saying how it kind of purges and gets the darkness out, and it was kind of an aha moment for me because I was like, that's why I'm doing it. And so.
Yeah, my husband said to me the other day, your poems are so dark, I'm just worried, are you okay? I'm like, it's on the page. Right?
Yeah.
So you don't have to worry about me, it's on the page. So
The
that's
thing
fine.
that Elise and I always laugh about is that, and you'll hear a lot of mystery and thriller writers say this, mystery and thriller writers are actually the nicest people.
They are.
And apparently it's the romance writers you need to watch out. They will stab you in the back at the conferences, is what we have heard from many different people. But the mystery and thriller writers, we think it's because like Elise said, you can purge all of those dark thoughts. It's very cathartic. You can get it all out on the page and write about these dark, dark things. And then it's like, okay, that's out of my system.
Right.
I'm gonna go like volunteer at the local library or the food bank or whatever, and then we just move on from it, and you're not like holding that anger and the darkness in the way that I guess some people tend to do. So
The way those romance
well.
writers
Yeah. Tricky romance writers
Oh, the tension. Oh, that's so funny. Well, you've already answered the question about setting and why you've chosen your setting. I guess you kind of have too, but is there a particular reason that New York is beloved in your stories?
Well, I reported a lot in New York. I was sent all over as a sports reporter to different places for different sporting events, but I would say most of them were in New York, the majority. And I really wanted to take people behind the scenes of the places that you would never have access to and get to know what it's like. Like behind the scenes of Madison Square Garden is not shiny and bright, and there's like a broken elevator that takes you down and
never
the
up.
wires, never up. The wires that are hanging on the wall, the hidden tunnels in Madison Square Garden and in Yankee Stadium in book 2, and also what it feels like to be on the dugout, at Yankee Stadium. It was kind of a cool thing to experience, and also like what's going on with the athletes and what's kind of weaving the murder into that and the suspects into it. But also I wanted to take them behind the scenes, and maybe this is a little off of what you're saying because it's not quite setting, but what it's like to be a woman in a man's world, because when I was there and probably still now, sports reporting was mostly men, and what that feels like and what that experience is like. So I wanted to bring a bunch of my experience from that onto the page.
Yeah. Well, your character is doing a similar thing, right? She's in a very male-dominated world, and a difficult environment, physical environment.
Yeah, and that's definitely part of your setting question as well, I would say, is that, so where she and a merchant works is in the Thousand Islands in upstate New York, way upstate, like on the border of Ontario, Canada. There's the St. Lawrence River, and Thousand Islands are actually more like 1,600 islands, and some are in Canada and some are in the US. And if a crime occurs on one of these islands, it's very complicated. The Coast Guard might get involved, the Ontario Provincial Police might get involved, the state police might get involved, all the towns along the river have their own police departments, and a lot of research, of course, goes into figuring out how that would all play out from a police procedure perspective, but it complicates things for her. And so over the course of the series, she tries to figure out, the lay of the land, and also, yes, as you pointed out, she's the only senior investigator who's a woman, and actually, in the early books, she's the only investigator, period, with the Bureau of Criminal Investigation who's a woman in that area, and that actually does impact the way that she investigates and some of the struggles that she experiences. And in fact, in the early books, her partner, Tim Wellington, who is local to the area, who knows it much better than she does, they kind of have this push and pull because he feels like he knows the community much more, on a deeper level than she does. But because she's a woman, I feel that he also doesn't necessarily trust that she knows what she's doing. And in the early books, she kind of doesn't know what she's doing. She's not only is she new to the area, but she is suffering pretty severe PTSD after being abducted by the serial killer that she was hunting down, and she shouldn't be working yet. So that all plays into the evolution of her character, but the setting is a big part of that because the geography makes it all so much more complicated for her. Having a boat to a crime scene, for example, before she knows how to drive a boat and all of that.
Can I have one thing? Oh, I'm sorry. You go.
Go ahead.
No, you.
No, I'll read it down.
What I was just going to say to the students is we're telling you, like for me, a woman in a man's world, for Tessa, a woman in a man's world. We're also telling you that we're making things as difficult as possible for our protagonists. So our settings are hard, right? Whatever it is. I mean, you don't have to be a female in a man's world. You can have your character be isolated for some reason. But you want to, as a writer, make things as hard as possible for your character to make it more interesting.
Right. Yeah. It's a great point.
Yeah, well, all I was saying, and this adds to that then, the fact that she's pregnant now must simply magnify those issues for her.
Yeah.
Like, can I still compete? And
Yeah.
how will people perceive me?
Exactly, and where do I go from here once the baby is born? And because she has a lot of survivor's guilt, because she was the only one of the serial killer's targets who made it out alive, she struggles with still feeling like she needs to justify her decisions and her actions and like give back somehow, because she does feel like she should have been able to do more to stop that killer before he followed her to the Thousand Islands and killed again. So there is that piece of it too. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to open it up for audience questions. I have one more, but I'm going to save that to the end, just in case.
Sounds
So
good.
is there anyone here that would like to ask a question? Yes, in the back. Yes.
Okay. What is your writing process like? Just in general?
Yeah, great question.
It was very different for my first book, which I was trying to find an agent for and get a publisher for. And I would say it was everywhere across the board. So for your first manuscript, and I assume most of you are in that point, you have so much you're learning as you're writing. And so I would try to write a certain amount every day in terms of structure, but I tried outlining, I tried everything. I tried free writing, and I didn't it took a while to find my rhythm. Now for my second book, where I had a year, I personally know my beginning, I know the crime, I know the ending, I know who did it. Then I plot out the red herrings and the clues. And I know Liam will be a secondary plot, I know there'll be a love secondary plot. And then I start writing. So I have a roadmap, but I don't have an outline. And I find that a lot of what comes out on the page is sort of discovered through time and through writing, but having like the pebbles to the path helps me a lot, like to where to go.
Can I just, how long did it take you to learn over your life as a writer to trust that you would be able to figure it out?
For a book too, you mean? Like
For a book, or even when you were a reporter? I think a lot of times people are afraid that if they don't know everything right now, that I can't sit down and write, or I
Yeah.
won't know what the next chapter is, or I won't know what the next book is. So how do you learn to trust yourself?
That's a great question, because the thing about writing, and when I was a reporter, I had to do, like, if I got a minute 30 for a story, like, that was a good day, you know? So that was pretty easy, in a sense, once I learned the rhythm, but it was also always challenging, because you wanted to make it better, or make it a little more creative with marrying sound and what you're saying. So I had that. But for a writer, and that's such a great question, because you're doing as you're learning. There's so much nuance to learn, and the only way to learn is to do. So I would just keep experimenting. I think it took me 8 years, and I was taking classes all over before I got my manuscript to the point where Tessa forced me to go to Pitch Fest and I got an agent. So you're always learning, and try to enjoy the process. Try to enjoy the journey. I kind of thought it was so cool to always be like, oh, that's so interesting, or oh, there's that. And I still feel like all those bad drafts that I put aside, they were building blocks. Like, it's not like, oh, this sucked, I'm going here. I went here, and then I went here, and then I went here. So it's all leading you to the right spot.
Yeah, that's very well said. I also think you can't edit something and make something better that isn't already on the page. So the best thing to do when you're a writer just starting out is try to get as many words on the page as you can. Try to get the structure of the novel down. Make your goal, to get 30 chapters or whatever in a coherent story. And then after that, you can do anything. You can do anything with that story, and you will find a way to rewrite it, to make it revise, make it what you want, what you ultimately want it to be. But that's really the best way. The magic is all in the revision. Everybody's first draft is terrible. Everybody, doesn't matter if you're a New York Times bestselling author, or won a Pulitzer, or whatever it is. Everybody's first draft of anything is always bad.
No, it's true. And just to add one thing,
I remember I was in a class once when I was starting, and the writing, there was a book, there was something in the book that said that they were teaching, if you finish a book, you are 1% of 100 people. Like, you are the 1% that finished a book. And so even if it's the worst written, most hackneyed, most overwritten stuff, you accomplished something amazing.
Yeah.
Now go back and fix it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so right now just have your goal be to finish, because that's a huge accomplishment, and you should be very proud of that, and you shouldn't expect more. And I also feel like you're not, like, don't ever feel like you're not a good writer if your draft isn't good. Like you said, everyone's first draft isn't good, but also you're learning. Like you don't know how to do algebra until you've learned your multiplication tables, and that doesn't mean you're stupid. It just means you haven't learned it yet. So just have faith in the process.
Yeah, and I would just add, which goes back to the question about writing process, that I think one of the hardest things to do when you're writing a book is to not get in the weeds with the story, because when you're in it and you're really thinking about, every sentence and every paragraph, which by the way should all move the plot of the story forward. Every single paragraph, every single page should move the story forward, even if it's just in an incremental way. But you need to be able to step back and see like the big picture of the story, or it can just become so overwhelming because you're dealing with so many words and so many chapters and so many ideas. So I always think the best way, and the way that I still do it to this day, is my outline is really just like usually 2 pages of 2 sentences maybe of what happens in every single chapter. That's it. And then, and that leaves a lot of room for creativity. I know the beginning, I know the middle, I know the end, but I can build on those chapters. And when I get to the point, which always happens, it's happening to me right now with the draft I'm working on, where I'm completely lost and I can't remember, I sit down for the day, like, what am I doing with this chapter again? Where am I? I haven't looked at it for a couple days or whatever. I go back to that initial outline document and I just look, okay, chapter 23. Oh, okay, so this is what's supposed to happen. And it just makes it feel so much more manageable if you look at it like that in kind of bite-sized pieces.
Yep. And by the way, for all of those of you in academic writing, it's all true there too.
Yeah.
Right? It's definitely all true there.
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
You had a question, Catherine. Yes.
No, my question was, how do you come up with these stories? Like, I know you answered the why, but like, how does it come up to your mind, or I don't know, for you to be like, this is what I'm writing about, and this is gonna be the thriller. This is when it catch, right? I don't know.
Do you want me to go first for that one?
Go ahead.
So it's a little different for us, I guess, because we write series books, because every next book in the series is going to be informed a little bit by what happened in the previous book, and you're dealing with a lot of recurring characters and a lot of through lines and, you know, threads that we pull from one story into the next. For me, I come up with the ideas based on the crime. The crime is always the first thing. The setting, like this whole series is set up in the Thousand Islands, but you know, on various different islands and various different towns. Once I decide the setting and the crime, the story just kind of builds around that. So for example, with the 3rd book, which is called Dead Wind, I knew I wanted to set it on this place called Wolf Island, where there's a massive wind farm, and there are very few people who live on this island, which is huge, but they have this wind farm. And I knew from visiting and doing some research that when the wind farm went up, the locals were really upset about it, because they felt like this, for one thing, the turbines, if you get close to them, are actually very, very noisy, and there's all this concern, this environmental concern to, you know, impact on bird life and all this various stuff. And so there had been a lot of controversy when the wind farm went up. So I visited that wind farm once, just kind of passing through, like years before I started working on any of these books. And it was kind of a stormy day, and the sky, you know, the sky gets kind of green right before a storm. It was really, really windy, and I was driving on this very flat landscape looking at these insane wind turbines that looked like very alien, you know. And I just thought, what a cool place to set a story. And I thought, I don't know, apparently my thriller brain kicked in even back then, and I thought, gosh, you know, this would be like a scary place to find a dead body. And years later, when I sat down to write the next book in the series, I thought, now is my chance to put a dead body at the base of that wind turbine and figure out why it's there. And that's how I always start with all of the books, and even standalones that I'm working on too with totally different characters, is here's the crime, there's the body, how did it get there, who is responsible, but also who else might have had a motive to put that person there, and what other reasons could there be for them ending up there. So in this book, the victim is involved in local politics and was thinking about putting another wind farm on a different part of the mainland, and so does that come into play or not? And then of course from there it's like, maybe that seems like the most logical solution or path, but it's maybe just a red herring, and there are all kinds of other reasons why someone would want them dead, and then you reveal those slowly over the course of the story. So that's how it starts for me.
I think it must be harder when you're younger, because we've had a lot of experiences, and you know, for me, I'm basing it a lot on my experience as a reporter. So I would imagine, you know, I'm looking out, you guys are pretty young, and I guess if you're having trouble finding the how, I would say to think close to, I don't mean close to home like killing someone in your book close to home. But I mean, like, maybe you write about people your age. Maybe you write about something you know happened in a school district near you, or you find something that you can relate to, so you can create characters that are easier, especially for your first novel, or that you can understand what might be in their brain. Because I think it's hard. I think writing something that you don't have a connection to, especially for your first novel, is extremely hard. And maybe it gets easier as you go on, but if you find like a touchstone to it to dive into, that could sometimes help.
Just to piggyback off of that, something else that can work quite well, and actually worked quite well for me with the very first book, is if you love a book or a movie or a TV series or something so much that you think to yourself, I wish I had written that, try to write your own story that's kind of inspired by that. So with the first book in my series, Death in the Family, I made no qualms about hiding. It was 100% an ode to Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None. And there are so many similarities between And Then There Were None and Death in the Family, but I modernized it. I changed up a lot of, I introduced a detective, and the whole backstory, and I made it something completely different so that if you were to read it, you would never think, oh, this is like a total, rip-off of And Then There Were None. You wouldn't know that, but there are also many aspects of that original book that inspired aspects of that story. So that can be a good place to start too, because whatever idea you come up with, you want it to be something that's going to hold your interest for a really long time, because even if you get fast at writing books, you're probably not writing it faster than 6 months or something. So it needs to be something that's going to be pretty interesting for you for a long, long while.
Yes, behind Betty, and then we'll do Betty.
When you edit your work, what is the emphasis? Is on the story or on the grammar? Or
All of the above. So there are multiple editing stages in the journey of, getting your book from that very first draft manuscript out into the market. The editing first is a lot to do with the story itself, and just making sure that, as I said, every paragraph, every page is moving the story forward. There's no unnecessary scenes, unnecessary character traits or whatever it may be. And then as you refine and polish the manuscript, then it's looking at things more like grammar and sentence structure, and just making sure like the words really sing on the page. But it's a slow process of in increments, making small improvements over and over and over. By the time the book gets to the bookstore shelf or to the library shelf, we've read it probably
Too many times.
like maybe 50 times or something like that.
Bob's read it 60.
And our husbands and our writing partners and our
Yeah.
critique groups have all read it too, and our editors have read it, and proofreaders have read it. So it's a long, long process to get to that point.
That first process is called developmental editing, and my book, the draft that I turned in Monday, is developmental edit, and I turned in 66,000 words. The book will be 80,000 words. So there's going to be a lot of developing in that. And so that first round is really about, there could be a character you end up taking out, or a character you end up taking in. Usually I have a list called threads of all the threads that I sort of know as I'm going are not closed yet. And I go back and I try to close those threads and make sure that I have those. So there's a lot of editing, and I laugh about the copy editing with the grammar and spelling, because I get these notes from the copy editors from my publisher. We really think there should be a comma here because of blah, 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 blah. Is that okay? I'm like, sure. I am not good at grammar. She's always correcting. I have no idea. I'm like, yes, if you want a comma, go for it.
Well, and there are experts, for every part of the process too. Like the developmental editor who you work with early on is not looking for that kind of stuff.
No.
But the proofreader, that's their bread and butter. They really want to know at that point. They're looking, you know, on a much more granular level what needs to happen to make every single sentence as accurate as it can be. But it's a style thing too, so, you know, they do sometimes ask permission, which is funny. I feel the same way. If they want to make a suggestion, I'm like, sure, that sounds good. And you know what you're doing probably better than I do at this point.
See, I used to argue with my poetry editors. I was like, nope, want that comma there.
But that's poetry. It's such a, yeah, the language is so spare to begin with that
Yeah.
everything counts, right? Yeah, and it's a style thing too.
Yeah,
I'd be right there with you on the poetry.
Betty?
What types of things do you find you have to do research about? And how do you do that research? Is it online? Do you go for interviews? You mentioned that you actually went and you had seen the place and you thought, okay, I'm going to use that. You know, what do you have to see in person? I'm really interested in how other writers deal with that.
Yeah, so I guess when you're writing a mystery or a thriller, especially if you have a detective, and both of our series have involved detectives, you really need to find someone who works in law enforcement who will be generous enough to answer your questions and give you advice and tell you, pull back the curtain to say, here's what happens behind the scenes, and by the way, it's not at all what you see in the movies, so don't base your stuff on what happens on TV in the movies, because that's not accurate. So for me, I have a number of people in the area where the books are set who are like subject matter experts on various things. Like I have a medical examiner, and I have a sheriff of the county, and I have a couple of different investigators that I kind of have on speed dial, and they've been kind enough to say, oh yeah, if you have questions, reach out to me. But it really depends on the book. For the Devil's at the Door, which is the 5th book in the series, there's part of the plot has to do with a scuba diving accident, and I don't know anything about scuba diving, so I had to find some people, not just who had scuba diving experience, but who had scuba diving experience in the St. Lawrence River at the time of year that the crime, you know, or the incident takes place, which can be difficult. So what you want to do is ask a lot of people, ask around, get on Facebook, because like this couple who ended up being so instrumental for allowing me to get those scenes as accurate as possible had a Facebook page, because they actually take groups down to dive wrecks in the St. Lawrence River. And so I reached out to them. I just found them on Facebook and reached out, and luckily for us, for all writers, I have never encountered a person who's an expert on something who I've needed to talk to who has said, no, I'm not interested. Even if you're not a published writer yet, people love to talk about themselves and their experience, especially if they're an expert in something. They are thrilled if you come to them and say, hey, tell me all about what it's like, you know? And they're usually very willing to do it, which is terrific for us. And then you thank them in the acknowledgments, and you send them a copy of the book, you know, signed and personalized when it's out, and it's a win-win for everyone. They get to show their friends their name in the book, and it works out great.
I actually had an issue. I have an FBI agent play a major role in my next book, Close Call, and I reached out to the FBI. There's a public relations email, and just asked if they could help me, because I had heard that they have that resource. And they arranged for me to speak for an hour with someone in whatever unit, and I can't remember, handled kidnapping. And they let me tape it as long as I didn't use it. I mean, it was amazing. So I had all the questions. I sent it to them ahead of time. And even if there was something where I had to fictionalize, because it obviously is fiction and certain things have to work, they would be like, okay, that wouldn't happen, but that would be believable, you know, because the people who read these books are experts, and you don't want to mess that up. I like interviewing people the most in terms of how to find information for Dangerous Play, which goes back to Kate's time on the U.S. national team as a teenager. I spoke to 2 women who play D1 soccer, and who were on national camps, and they really gave me so many ideas for stuff that happens in those flashbacks. That was really fun.
Great, John?
Yeah, so telling these serialized stories, to me, like, this is just my interpretation from like watching stuff, like let's say like a show with like 7 seasons, you're watching season 1, there's like, sometimes there's a lack of tension with the protagonist because like, okay, well they're in the next season. So how do you tackle that challenge when you're writing a story and you know it's going to be serialized, of creating that tension with your protagonist?
Yeah, that's a great question.
It is a great question.
I try to approach each book by introducing a standalone mystery, but then work in the recurring characters somehow. So you still are getting, like I said before, some evolution of the character, just like you would get with like serialized TV programs or whatever it might be. But the individual mysteries that need to be resolved in one book or like in one episode, you know, if you're thinking about it in TV terms, because that's the case, because none of the mysteries that I deal with bleed into the next book, they really have to be resolved. So that's the way that I have to keep the tension high, I have to keep the stakes as high as possible, because I need to find a way in those 300 pages to resolve everything. And so even though a lot of the characters are coming back, the story, each individual story is really like a self-contained mystery.
It makes me think of Game of Thrones because they certainly threw you there. I think if you have one protagonist, you can't do it in a way because you'll always know they're coming back in the next book. So you can have the tension and you can build tension, but that's part of what draws readers and viewers to those episodes or to that book, because they want to know Shayna and they want Shayna back there every time, or they want to watch Detective, I don't know why Magnum came to my mind, but you know, they wanna, I never even watched it, Magnum, you know, back on the show. And that's just who your viewer is. Now, if you want to be like totally freaked out by something, you watch and you don't know if the protagonists are going to be around or not, you watch something like Game of Thrones and they're going to like, you know, throw you on that stuff, but that would have to be written in third person, and it would have to be not one protagonist, but like an epic kind of story. But you could certainly throw a lot of crap at them, you know, and
Is that the literary term?
yeah, that's my literary term.
Absolutely.
Yeah, to try to build the tension. But yeah, that's inherently, I guess, an issue.
I would just add, the more that you can pull the rug out from the reader too, like throw some twists in there, that'll up the tension for sure. Like I'm thinking, because you had mentioned on TV, I don't know if all of you or any of you have watched Mayor of Easttown with Kate Winslet, but that's an amazing crime TV series, and this hopefully is not a spoiler. I will say it in a way that makes it not a spoiler in case you want to watch it, but somewhere around like maybe the 1/3 mark of the story, one of the major characters is done for, like in the most shocking of ways. And you watch it and think,
I don't remember.
all right, oh, I'll tell you after. And you watch it and think, okay, like I get it, you know, these people, they're all this is their story, but I mean, this is a character you would never imagine that they would kill off 1/3 of the way through the series, and then they sure did.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you can find a way to really throw readers that, and then of course if that happens and it's a major player, or it doesn't have to be that you kill someone off, but you know, some big twist that then kind of reframes the way that the reader is looking at the story, then that increases the tension for everyone involved, because if the reader didn't know about that situation, then your protagonist didn't know either. So now they're looking at their world and the crime or whatever it is, this, you know, the storyline in a completely different way, because if you are pulling the rug out from under the reader, you're pulling the rug out from under your protagonist too.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Psycho.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
think it's about the woman.
Yeah.
And then
Exactly. There are
great
so
point.
many ways to do it. Like psychological fiction is great to research for that reason, because it's all a bait and switch. The whole genre is a bait and switch. You think you know who's telling the story until 3/4 of the way through, and then, oh, that is not the narrator at all. And it's just like a clever way of having told the story, and it just, again, completely reframes the entire plot, and you're like with your jaw on the floor. So that can be a lot of fun.
Disclaimer is a new show that
Totally did that. I would like recommend Disclaimer. because the way they told that on in the series. And you know, the shows that you said like didn't have the tension and were a little boring, study those too. Study what they don't do.
Right.
And say to yourself, oh, they should have done that. Like study what doesn't work, because you can learn a lot from that.
Okay.
Okay, a genre question from someone who does poetry and is, you know, currently teaching things like Moby Dick and Billy Budd.
What are the? Yeah.
What makes a thriller a thriller? What do you what components do you need to include to distinguish it from crime or detective or mystery or whatever? What makes it a thriller?
You can go first.
Okay. There's so much overlap between subgenres, especially in the crime world, the crime fiction world. You know, you've got your locked room mysteries, you've got your suspense, you've got your domestic suspense. Like you can get very specific with every subgenre. So because there's so much overlap, books often fall into multiple categories. Like I would say our books are mysteries, but
my
they're also
publisher calls
thrillers.
them thrillers.
Yeah, but they're also kind of, well, yours a little bit, but not as much as mine, police procedurals, but you do have a detective involved and there is some police procedure involved, and so you've got all those categories. I think the real thing that makes it a thriller is the pacing. It needs to be an absolute page turner. Like you can't have, you know, a lot of lulls in the story where you're like setting a lot of stuff up and it's kind of like, oh, we're making breakfast. No, someone's got to die. Some clues got to be revealed. You know, there's a storm on the horizon, like whatever it is, something has to constantly be happening. And some of that doesn't necessarily have to do with the story itself. It can be more like something happening with the character, like a situation that the character's in that's uncomfortable or that's challenging in some way. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a massive, plot point, but something that keeps the tension high, that keeps the pages turning, is typically what makes it a thriller.
Okay.
So it's so funny because the definition I heard of it was different, which shows that it's not quite. I was on a panel with Harlan Coben, which was a little highlight of my career so far. And I'll say he made a point of saying he thinks the whole discussion or thoughts of the way it's broken down is almost unnecessary because there's so much crossovers. Like literally, I thought it was a mystery, and I'm marketed as a thriller. So there's so much crossover, and I don't know that's that important to really define it because the chances are it'll get redefined by a publisher or an agent. But my understanding was that it was like a Dan Brown novel, like the action was happening at the time, like a kidnapping, versus the murder happened and it's a whodunit. But I don't even know if that's true because, again, like I was categorized in a different way. Some people say if they want to appeal more to men, they'll call it a thriller.
Yeah, that's a great point. When you're trying to get an agent, and of course you have to, in your query letter, you have to describe your book and you have to say the genre or the subgenre, like I have written a domestic thriller and it's 80,000 words and ready for your review or whatever it may be. But Elise is right. There's a very good possibility that somebody along the way will decide it's actually better to market it as something a little bit different, like sometimes my books are marketed as police procedurals, but like other times they're called mysteries or other times they're called thrillers, and it just really depends on, from like a sales perspective and an audience perspective, who they're trying to reach. So you don't have to worry so much about it if you're a writer, I would say, as long as you describe your book in a way that has like pretty accurately represents the experience that the reader will have or that the agent or the editor will have. I love that question, thanks.
Yeah.
I think I just lost it. Hold on. How much self-conscious should a writer have, and can it ever replace outside criticism?
We all have imposter syndrome, I would say. I'd say pretty much every author that I know is very self-conscious and very self-critical. But I also think that that's one of the things that makes you a better writer over time, is if your standards for yourself are so high, you're gonna continue to raise the bar for yourself. And then that in turn, you know, you're getting better feedback out in the world. You're getting a better critique from others, because if your standards are high for yourself, then probably others will be receptive as well.
I think it's also, again, about not expecting a new writer to be here. You know, like, you're a good writer if you're here, because you can't have risen there yet. You haven't learned enough yet. So you have to be confident enough to be in the process of learning. And it's important to own that and be okay with it. And then when you're asking about critique, I think when you hear a critique, remember it's twofold. Someone is saying something doesn't work, and then they're saying, oh, maybe you could fix it this way. You have to separate those two things, because the person who's critiquing you has dipped their toe into your book for a minute, right? Or an hour or 2 hours. You know your book better, so you may know the way to fix it better, but pay attention to them saying this isn't working. A lot of people hear critiques and they jump to the, oh, fix it this way. And they don't, maybe that's not the right way to fix it. That's not the important part of the critique. The important part of the critique is, something's not working for me. Now, if one person says it, maybe you ignore it. But if 2 or 3 people say it, maybe you need to reevaluate it and come up, usually I come up with my own fixes. But it took me a long time to understand how a critique is really twofold.
Yeah, it's your vision,
Yeah.
right? For whatever your piece of writing is, whether you're in a fiction class, whether you're in academic writing, right? You're trying to figure out what you're saying, and that's the most important thing. And if you can figure that out, right, the rest of it's gonna fall into place.
Yeah.
And the thing, it can be very hard to get feedback and criticism and a critique in the early days when you're just starting off and you aren't super confident in yourself and your abilities yet. But try to have a thick skin and try to think of it as, okay, they're just trying to, as Elise said, like, it's an aspect that's not working for them, but that might not be the case for everyone. You might want to get a second opinion, but try to think of it as, you know, an opportunity to take some feedback, and you may or may not use it the way they think that you should use it. But the hardest part is just letting go of, you know, the preciousness that you have for your story that you're working on, and going, okay, I'm going to be open to feedback, because the reality is, when you get published, readers are gonna all look at your book, and a lot of them are not gonna like it, because there is always someone out there. No book on earth appeals to absolutely everyone. Like, whatever, you know, even the Harry Potter series, beloved by millions, hundreds of millions, gets 1-star reviews. Everybody gets 1-star reviews. So it's good at this stage of the process when you're first starting off, I think, to get used to that kind of feedback a little bit and try not to take it too personally.
I also think that if you get feedback from a trusted reader, what often happens, at least for me, and you can weigh in on this, is that I go, yeah, I was hoping you weren't going to notice that.
Yeah.
Right? There's a piece there that in you recognizes what they're saying as something you should have paid attention to.
Absolutely.
All right, anything else? Other questions? All right, that's great. These 2 writers have brought books with them. If you are interested in purchasing them, they would like to eat, support their lifestyle. So we encourage you to buy books if you have a book-sized hole in your heart. Otherwise, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. If you'd give them a round of applause.
Thank you, everyone.
You're a great audience.